The jet bridge was crowded with the kind of people who carried themselves like the world owed them something. Polished leather shoes clicked against the metal floor, designer luggage rolled behind them like loyal pets, and conversations buzzed with the crisp tones of power deals and vacation plans that cost more than most yearly salaries. Elena Torres kept her head down, her hood drawn just far enough to shadow her face. Her ticket was folded once, twice, then tucked into her palm as she stepped into the aircraft's cool cabin air. The line moved forward, each passenger greeted by a flight attendant with a smile so perfectly rehearsed it seemed carved into her face. The smiles faltered when they reached Elena. She wasn't dressed like the others. No sharp blazers, no silk scarves. Just a faded gray hoodie with frayed cuffs, dark jeans with a threadbare patch at the knee, and sneakers that had seen better years. She nodded politely, but the attendant's eyes swept her once, dismissed her, and shifted quickly to the man in a tailored navy suit behind her. Elena walked down the narrow aisle, ignoring the way conversations faltered just slightly as she passed. A man in a pinstriped jacket leaned close to his seatmate, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Looks like she's on the wrong flight," he muttered, lips curling with amusement. His companion smirked into her champagne glass. Further down, a woman in oversized sunglasses perched her phone against the seatback, recording a soft commentary about her business class journey. Her eyes flicked up, pausing on Elena for just a second. Before her lips curved into a quiet, dismissive smile, the kind that said she had already labeled her as something small. Elena didn't answer any of it. She kept her steps measured, her focus on the numbers glowing faintly above the rows. 11. 11A through F. Then 12. Row 12, seat F window. She slid into it with practiced ease, tucking her worn backpack beneath the seat in front of her. The pack had been with her for years, its canvas faded to an army green that no longer looked new, a patch stitched roughly onto the front. The stitching was uneven, the kind you did yourself when you didn't care if anyone approved, only that it stayed. The man in the aisle seat glanced at her briefly. Rolex on his wrist, tablet in his hand, cologne so sharp it stung her nose. He didn't bother to move his legs to give her space, forcing her to sidestep and squeeze by. She murmured a quiet, "Thanks, anyway." He didn't respond. Around her, the plane filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses as attendants leaned attentively toward passengers dressed in expensive fabrics, pouring drinks and offering extra napkins. Elena received nothing more than a fleeting glance, as though her presence didn't require attention. She didn't mind. She'd learned long ago how to move unseen, how to let others underestimate her. She leaned back against the window, the vibration of the taxiing aircraft humming faintly through the pane. Her hoodie smelled faintly of detergent and jet fuel from another life, another time. She tugged the sleeves down over her hands and shifted slightly, curling against the cool glass. Her dark hair spilled loose from her ponytail, falling over her shoulder in quiet waves. Whispers still drifted across the row, fragments of judgments that never stopped at words. But Elena let them pass. Her eyelids grew heavy, her breathing steady. As the cabin buzzed with self-importance, businessmen comparing contracts, influencers rehearsing angles, she closed her eyes. The roar of voices dulled into background noise, the way she'd once tuned out radio static in darker skies. The seatbelt light blinked overhead. Elena's fingers brushed her backpack once, grounding herself in the familiar weight of it, before she settled into sleep. No one noticed. To them, she was just another passenger, just row 12. But the stories stitched into that pack, and the steady rhythm of her breathing told a truth no one here would have believed, even if she spoke it. She let the cabin fade around her, surrendering to rest, as the flight carried her toward something only she knew was coming. The hum of the engines had been steady for hours, a low, even sound that lulled most of the cabin into a half-sleep. Overhead lights dimmed, windows shuttered against the endless stretch of ocean below, conversations reduced to murmurs. Elena drifted in and out, her cheek pressed to the cool window, the steady vibration of the fuselage grounding her. It might have stayed that way uneventful, anonymous if not for the sudden jolt that ripped through the aircraft. The first wave of turbulence rattled the overhead bins, plastic latches clattering like teeth. A few glasses toppled from tray tables, shattering across the floor with a sharp crash. Gasps filled the cabin, followed by the uneasy chuckles of passengers convincing themselves it was nothing. But then came the second hit harder. The plane dipped, shuddered, and for a moment the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on every chest at once. Elena's eyes opened, sharp and alert, even as her body stayed still. She didn't panic, not yet. Turbulence alone didn't rattle her, but the sound that came next did. The captain's voice broke through the intercom, strained, edged with something no passenger ever wanted to hear from the cockpit fear. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated. Seatbelts fastened. His words faltered, broken by a hiss of static. We may need assistance. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, some nervous laughter, some curses muttered under breath. A businessman adjusted his tie with jerky hands, trying to mask the sweat beading on his forehead. The influencer across the aisle clutched her phone, recording with wide, frightened eyes, her earlier confidence gone. Then the curtain to the cockpit burst open. The purser stepped out, her polished demeanor stripped away, her voice high and tight. "We need help now. The co-pilot's collapsed. Is there a pilot on board?" The words hit like a gunshot. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Passengers stared at one another, as if someone else might move first, but no one did. The businessmen who'd been so loud hours before sank into their seats, eyes darting away. One man muttered something about liability under his breath, as if the word could shield him from responsibility. The influencers clung to their phones like lifelines, whispering to followers who couldn't save them. Executives pulled at collars, shifted uncomfortably, but didn't stand. The purser's eyes scanned the rows, desperate. "Please, if anyone here has flown anything, we need you now." Her voice cracked on the last word. Still nothing. The arrogance that had filled the cabin on departure had evaporated, replaced by the raw edge of fear. The air smelled different now, metallic and sharp, as if panic itself had a scent. Somewhere toward the back, a baby wailed, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. Elena shifted in her seat. Her hood slid back slightly, exposing dark strands of hair as she straightened. Her fingers brushed the edge of her backpack, grounding herself in the familiar texture. She blinked once, slow, then lifted her eyes. Row 12 had gone unnoticed for most of the flight, just another woman in worn clothes, another anonymous traveler. But now, as the purser's frantic voice echoed again, "Is there a pilot on board?" Elena's gaze sharpened. The noise around her fell away. The panic, the whispers, the fear, all of it blurred at the edges. Her breathing slowed, steady, deliberate. She sat forward in her seat, hands resting lightly on her knees, as if readying herself for something she'd been waiting for all along. No one noticed her yet. They were too busy scanning each other's faces, praying someone else would move. But Elena heard the call, every word landing heavy, unmistakable. She was awake now, and she knew exactly what it meant. Elena's fingers brushed once more against the faded canvas of her backpack, feeling the outline of the patch stitched there years ago before she finally rose from her seat. The motion was quiet, unhurried, but it drew every eye in the cabin. Row 12 had been invisible until now, dismissed, overlooked, but in the heavy silence that followed the purser's desperate plea, her standing up felt louder than any announcement. Heads turned. The businessman with the pinstriped jacket let out a scoff, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding. She doesn't even look like she can drive a car, let alone fly a plane." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the rows, sharp and cutting, the kind of laughter people use to mask their own fear. An influencer near the aisle shook her head and whispered into her phone, "This is insane." Someone else muttered about liability, another about wasting time. Elena didn't answer any of them. Her gaze stayed forward, her steps measured as she began moving down the narrow aisle. The purser froze when she saw her approaching, half a step of hesitation before she realized Elena wasn't turning back. Passengers craned their necks, disbelief written across their faces. A man in a loosened tie snorted. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" But Elena walked past them steady, her breathing even, her face calm. When she reached the cockpit door, the purser tried to stop her, her arm half raised in instinct. But Elena simply unzipped her backpack and pulled out a laminated card, its edges worn and scuffed from years of being carried in places most people would never go. She held it up without a word. The name read Elena Torres. The photo was younger, her hair cropped shorter, her eyes the same sharp intensity. Across the top, in faded block letters, was her call sign, Falcon. The purser's breath caught. She didn't understand all the codes, all the numbers printed on the ID, but she understood enough. She stepped aside. The cockpit was cramped, the air thick with the smell of stress and electronics. The captain sat rigid in his seat, pale, sweat beading along his hairline, as he struggled to manage controls alone. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Elena's. For a moment, doubt flickered there. Then, recognition, sharp and immediate. "You've flown this model before?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, but laced with urgency. Elena gave a single nod. She slid into the co-pilot's seat with the ease of someone stepping into a familiar rhythm, her hands already moving across switches, dials, and levers. The overhead panel lit beneath her touch. She adjusted a trim, checked the throttle, scanned the gauges. The engine's restless hum steadied, the vibrations smoothing out under her guidance. In the cabin behind, silence fell like a blanket. Passengers who had scoffed now leaned forward, watching through the open cockpit door. The businessman who had laughed sat rigid, his smirk gone, his hands clutched tightly on his armrests. The influencer lowered her phone, the red light still recording but forgotten. Conversations died, replaced by the low, steady sound of Elena's voice as she communicated with the captain, her tone calm, professional, commanding without ever raising in volume. Altitude correcting, stabilizer set, engines holding steady. The captain exhaled, some of the strain draining from his face. "Falcon," he said softly, like he hadn't expected to say the name again. Elena didn't look up, her focus locked on the instruments, on the sky beyond the glass. "Let's bring her home," she murmured. The plane leveled, the turbulence fading into a steady glide. Outside the cockpit, disbelief hung heavy in the air. The same people who had mocked the woman in row 12 now sat in stunned silence, their judgment drained away, leaving only the sound of engines steadying under Falcon's hand. The plane shuddered again, a violent jolt that rattled the overhead bins and sent a few gasps tumbling down the aisles. Warning lights blinked across the instrument panel, sharp flashes of red and amber, but Elena's hands moved with a calm rhythm, her touch steady where others might have faltered. She leaned into the radio, her voice low, controlled, a measured counterweight to the storm outside. "Frankfurt Tower, this is Falcon on approach. Flight 392 requesting immediate clearance, co-pilot incapacitated. I have control." Her words crackled through the speakers in the cabin, carried into the silence where every passenger strained to listen. The authority in her tone wasn't loud, wasn't theatrical. It was the quiet steadiness of someone who had been here before, someone who had stared down worse and walked away. Each syllable radiated calm, threading through the panic like a lifeline. The captain glanced sideways at her, sweat beading along his temple, but his breathing slowed as her movements took over. Switch by switch, dial by dial, she trimmed the aircraft against the turbulence, coaxing it back into balance. Stabilizer adjusted. Altitude steady at 15, 0 and descending, she said evenly. The hum of engines shifted, smoothing under her control, like a wild animal slowly yielding to its handler. In the cabin, the earlier arrogance had dissolved entirely. The businessmen who once scoffed now gripped their armrests with white knuckles, eyes glued to the intercom speaker as though it carried the only truth that mattered. The influencers held their phones slack in their hands, their practiced smiles gone, replaced by pale faces and wide eyes. A woman who had earlier whispered about Elena's hoodie now sat clutching her rosary, lips moving in prayer. The plane was hushed, every soul anchored to the calm that poured from row 12's forgotten passenger turned savior. Outside, the storm clouds broke into jagged streaks of lightning, illuminating the runway in the distance. Elena guided the descent with surgical precision, voice steady as she relayed updates. Gear down, flaps 20, crosswind accounted for. Her tone never wavered. Even as the aircraft jolted in the wind shear, even as the cabin erupted with muffled sobs, she remained the same, calm, quiet, deliberate. The wheels struck the runway with a heavy thud, rubber burning against asphalt. The plane bounced once, then steadied, engines roaring as Elena guided the nose down. The ground rose up fast, lights blurring past, and then stillness. The aircraft slowed, brakes hissing, the weight of panic finally bleeding away. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Then the applause came, sudden and overwhelming. Passengers clapped, some openly weeping, others bowing their heads as if ashamed of the things they had said hours earlier. Relief filled the cabin like oxygen after drowning. Elena pulled off the headset, her face unreadable, and unbuckled with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown throughout. She stepped out of the cockpit, her hoodie loose around her shoulders, her backpack strap slung casually over one arm. The same passengers who had dismissed her now watched in awe, their eyes wide with something between gratitude and shame. Near the front, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve, her small voice carrying in the hush. "Mama, that's the pilot lady." Elena's gaze found hers, and for the first time since she stood, her expression softened. She gave the girl a small, warm smile, the kind of smile that reached past words, that said she saw her, understood her, that she too had once been overlooked and small. The girl's face lit up, her awe pure and untainted by the judgment of adults. Elena adjusted her pack and walked down the aisle, shoulders straight, her steps unhurried. The crowd parted instinctively, heads bowing slightly as she passed. No one spoke. The arrogance was gone, replaced by respect that felt heavier than any applause. When she reached the exit, she didn't pause, didn't linger. She just kept walking, the faintest trace of her smile still there. For the first time, the world was forced to see her not as the woman in the worn hoodie, not as the passenger in row 12, but as Falcon, the one who brought them safely home.